My name is Josh Guberman, and I'll be sharing some highlights from my article, Actually Autistic Twitter as a Site for Epistemic Resistance in Crip Futurity. I want to acknowledge the National Science Foundation and the University of Michigan Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee who provided support for this work. Actually Autistic Twitter is an online community of people who identify as autistic and their allies and co-conspirators. The hashtag is used for discussions that, among other things, claim and prioritize experiential expertise, embrace neurodivergence, and document anti-autistic ableism. Autism research is a common community topic approached through these lenses. As an autistic autism scholar in human-computer interaction, HCI, I found these research discussions particularly interesting because, as recent work has shown, HCI research relating to autism tends to treat autistic people as passive recipients of technological interventions rather than as agentic participants who, by virtue of their lived experiences, might otherwise be considered subject matter experts. And so I wanted to see how these autistic perspectives on Twitter, which are often absent from HCI research, might inform the practices of autism technology researchers. This interpretivist study was framed by a number of guiding questions, including 1, how do these actually autistic research priorities differ from those of non-autistic stakeholders? And 2, what might those differences in priorities mean for HCI researchers? I'll talk about several key findings from and implications of this work, namely actually autistic Twitter users and academic autism researchers often appear interested in similar research topics, but have vastly different understandings of and priorities around those topics. Additionally, some actually autistic Twitter users want their tweets included in autism research, but are wary of exploitation. Then I conclude with an exploration of how viewing these insights within the framework of Crip technoscience may open new paths for autism technology researchers interested in supporting autistic difference, agency, and longevity. I collected my data in early 2021. Data collection was community-driven and consent-based. I tweeted out a call for community members to send me autism-related community content they felt should be included in my study, and I offered $20 gift cards to those who helped source data. Excluding public figures and organizations, I reached out to account owners of all the tweets in my dataset, giving them an opportunity to request their data to be excluded from the study, authority over whether and how they were cited, and the editorial approval over how my paper described their content. The bulk of my analysis centered around a comparison of an actually autistic Twitter chat about autism research priorities that took place in response to the 2019 International Society of Autism Research INSAR conference, and B, a published collection of commentaries about pressing research issues written ahead of the INSAR 2019 conference by 29 members of the editorial board of INSAR's journal Autism Research. INSAR is a widely influential organization within scientific and medical autism research, and I took these two artifacts as an opportunity to compare actually autistic research priorities with the status quo. Through qualitative, thematic coding, and critical discourse analysis, I found that people in my sample from actually autistic Twitter and the editors of autism research often converged around similar research priorities, but approached these priorities within different systems of meaning. One notable topic on which the two groups focused was autism interventions. The INSAR editors tended to approach autism interventions under the assumption that appearing less autistic is a desirable outcome, and focused on the efficacy, validity, and numeracy of options available to achieve this outcome. In contrast, people in the Twitter chat challenged the premise that the appearance of able normativity is a positive outcome for autistic people and called for research into the harms caused by traditional normalizing behavioral interventions. Chat participant EndeavorStar tweeted, quote, if we're measuring the wrong things, we get lauded evidence-based practices that are actually intensely harmful, end quote. Similarly, Theories of Mind wrote, quote, I'm very concerned about research being translated uncritically into tech for fine-grained behavioral control and surveillance. We urgently need research on the harms done, including when implemented as intended, end quote. For those unfamiliar with these discourses, dominant approaches to behavioral interventions have long been decried by many autistic self-advocates as abusive, traumatic, and sometimes dangerous. Emerging research bears out these longstanding concerns, demonstrating, for example, a relationship between exposure to these interventions and the disproportionately high rates of autistic suicide. These disparate approaches to behavioral interventions are directly relevant to HCI, where a majority of well-meaning autism research has been shown to support these potentially harmful interventions, often through the use of pervasive surveillance and control technologies. Applying appropriate and best practice research methods was another shared theme of interest. With a few exceptions I note in the paper, the autism researcher editor's priorities in this area tended to center around the needs for more interdisciplinary, translational, and rigorous research dealing with diagnosing and treating autism. In contrast, the autistic and non-autistic members of the Twitter chat were broadly concerned with who conducts autism research and who it serves. The Center for Research in Autism and Education in the chat called for, quote, more participatory research throughout the entire process, from writing the grants to designing the study, to analyzing and collecting the data, to taking the findings back to the community, end quote. Relatedly, some autistic users called for open access publications with more accessible, less pathologizing, and non-eugenical language. A separate theme that emerged within my dataset unique to the autistic Twitter users was the concern for ethical usage of autistic digital content in academic research. Some Twitter users were in favor of researchers using their digital content to provide perspectives often missing within academic research. However, they were wary of researchers using their scraped data within research that they might not approve of and wanted opportunities to consent to and have editorial control over the use of their data. Some members of Actually Autistic Twitter are academics ourselves, and in addition to requesting consensual data use, some of these users called for the opportunity to have their digital content and knowledge labor attributed to them without anonymization. For example, Alyssa Hillary Zisk tweeted, quote, I very much appreciated the researchers who asked whether I wanted to be anonymous, pseudonymous, or named, rather than assuming anonymity was what I'd want or what had to happen, end quote. This research has some important limitations. Namely, my data set is relatively small and my analyses are interpretivist, so I can only speak to the data I actually have. Further, my data are unrepresentative of autistic people as a whole, as Actually Autistic Twitter has been known to be primarily white. Future research into autistic research priorities will need to seek out more racially diverse perspectives and to seek to better understand and address structural barriers that keep autistics of color out of many existing autistic spaces. In my paper, I use Crip Technoscience, a framework created by Amy Hamray and Kelly Fritsch, to contextualize my findings within dominant HCI practices and to identify paths forward. Crip Technoscience has 4 central commitments, centering the work of disabled people as knowers and makers, access as friction, interdependence as a political technology, and disability justice. I'll briefly discuss my work in relation to these first 2 commitments. Contrary to a commonly held belief, research shows that some autistic people are more knowledgeable about autism than non-autistic people. The disjunctures between actually autistic and status quo research priorities I discuss suggest that seeking out and starting from autistic perspectives can radically shift the focus and direction of autism technology research. One way to accomplish this would be to center the work of disabled people as knowers and makers, to put autistic people and perspectives first, to meaningfully and completely involve autistics as leaders in autism research. However, there are some systemic barriers to autistic and otherwise disabled people co-producing academic research. While we work to dismantle these barriers, informal informational sources like Twitter may serve as credible and citable sources of expert information. Access as friction rejects understandings of accessibility based on the ideals of habilitation and inclusionism, instead asking designers to pay attention to how disabled people use technology to subvert and render accessible inhospitable infrastructure. Many HCI researchers are driven by strong motivation to do good, meaningfully engaging with people who may hold that our past research has caused harm can be uncomfortable, but in turning away or sanctioning contrary and frictional perspectives, we risk reifying existing power differentials and systems of oppression within the field. But we can choose to sit with these perspectives and people. Many of us already do this, and it won't hurt us in the long run, but may have real consequences for the people we turn away. Seeking out and sitting with these frictions may be a generative opportunity for pointing us towards new ways of understanding what beneficence can look like in our work. To wrap up, Twitter is one place in which autistic expertise and preferences about research reside, and I suggest we take these kinds of informal data seriously as credible epistemic artifacts, even with inevitably partial and incomplete data. Identifying discontinuities between marginalized and institutionalized knowledges and practices can lead to alternative and beneficial forms of research. As researchers, we have choices to make when we encounter these disjunctures, and these choices are political and they matter. Please choose kindly and wisely. And with that, I invite you to read the full paper and I welcome your questions. Thank you for your time.